Nature is something from which we torment, full of affection and intentionality toward humankind.
Youth is a happy time and a carefree time. In these troubled days, the very thoughtlessness of youth has led to a living nightmare. Addiction to drugs, too often acquired with tragic carelessness, may take control of a life and force actions not dreamed of before.
Can't touch this. You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
Extensive experimentation has failed to establish a medical use for LSD.
After Nixon, mainstream acceptance of psychedelics was impossible, and these compounds went underground, where it stayed for over a half-century, associated with counterculture and degeneracy.
Taking LSD is much the same as playing Russian roulette.
What are you doing out here? I'm floating up to the stars, Joe. You can't float out here. We're 3 stories up. Oh, no, I'm one with the universe. I'm God and Jesus, Joe.
But guys like Rick Doblin continued their research on the fringes. Psychedelic drugs are commonly reported to trigger life-altering, mind-expanding inward journeys. But since being scheduled dangerous and illegal, any therapeutic benefits have gone largely unrecognized. The word psychedelic is derived from the ancient Greek word psyche, meaning soul, and dalun, meaning to reveal. It translates to mind manifesting, and the first real documented use of psychedelics can actually be traced back to that same era.
From 1600 BC to 396 AD, in the Greek culture, the foundations of Western culture, they had the longest running mystery ceremonies ever. And they were involved with the psychedelic drug potion called Kikion, which we now, through modern scholarship, have identified as being similar to LSD.
Magic mushrooms, or shrooms, have been used to achieve oneness with the universe and to mingle with rainbow-striped elephants for over 9,000 years. Magic mushrooms are non-addictive and non-toxic hallucinogens. They contain a chemical called psilocybin. When you take shrooms, your body breaks it down into a different chemical, psilocin, and that's when things start to get a little weird. The psilocin makes its way up to your brain, where it starts binding to serotonin receptors. This causes increased stimulation in your brain and leads to the experience of hallucinations. These can be anything from auditory illusions to visual images, and it often causes time to appear to slow down. A lot of neural signals get transmitted via unconventional pathways, the scenic routes of your brain, so to speak. The brain has also been shown to temporarily create completely new neural pathways, which could be what causes someone on shrooms to experience a very different sense of self and to start thinking in profound ways.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. It's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright. Steady as she goes. Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby. At the Space Jam. Give it to me, baby. And you're talking back to me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Find yourself a girl and settle down.
It was the most peaceful, joyous, incredible, life-changing experience I've ever had in my life. It was freeing. It was really freeing.
This is Alana. She's describing what she felt after she took a dose of this stuff, psilocybin. It's a naturally occurring psychedelic compound, the kind that you find in magic mushrooms. She wasn't tripping in a dorm room or at Woodstock. It actually wasn't recreational at all.
If anything became unreal, or I was feeling nervous or not in touch with reality, I would squeeze his hand and he would squeeze mine back just to reassure me that I was okay and everything was all right.
The effects of magic mushrooms aren't always positive. Sometimes people can have bad trips, characterized by paranoia, fear, and panic. However, researchers have suggested that the chemical in shrooms could potentially be used as a treatment for depression, particularly in people who are unresponsive to typical approaches.
Research on psychedelics for medical use is preliminary. Most studies suffer from really small sample sizes, and that's partly because the federal government lists LSD and psilocybin as Schedule I drugs. So researchers face extra red tape, and funding is really hard to come by. Vox writer Herman Lopez reviewed dozens of studies that have been done, and he found that psychedelics show promise for treating addiction, OCD, anxiety, and in some cases, depression. One small study of 15 smokers found that 80% were able to abstain from smoking for 6 months after a psilocybin treatment. In a pilot study of 12 advanced cancer patients suffering from end-of-life anxiety, participants who took psilocybin generally showed lower scores on a test of depression. And a smaller study suggested that psilocybin treatment could actually help people with alcohol dependence cut back on their drinking days. We don't have all the answers as to what exactly these treatments are doing in the brain, but they seem to work by providing a meaningful and even mystical experience that leads to lasting changes in a patient's life.
The issues that I talked about or thought about or went into during my experience were transformative in the sense that I got to look at them through a different lens.
That feeling that Alana is describing is actually pretty spot on. When you take LSD, your brain looks something like this. You can actually see a higher degree of connectivity between various parts of the brain. It's not limited to the visual cortex. This communication inside the brain helps explain visual hallucinations, and the researchers argue that it could also explain why psychedelics can help people overcome serious mental issues. They wrote that you can think of psychiatric disorders as the brain being entrenched in pathology. Harmful patterns become automated and hard to change, and that's what can make things like anxiety and addiction and depression very hard to treat.
The reason that those kinds of conditions are so difficult to treat is that there's something more to them than just the illness.
That's Albert Garcia Romu. He's a Johns Hopkins researcher who's worked on studies of psilocybin and smoking addiction, like the one that Alana's involved with. He says that when participants take psychedelics,
they have very profound, meaningful experiences that can sometimes help them to make new insights into their own behaviors, and also to kind of reconnect with their values and priorities in terms of what's very important to them.
One of the big remaining questions here is how long these benefits actually last after the one-time treatment. A review of research on LSD-assisted psychotherapy and alcoholism found no statistically significant benefits after 12 months. And a recent study on psilocybin and depression found that benefits significantly dropped off after just 3 months. And of course, there are some big risks to using psychedelic drugs. It's hard to predict a patient's reaction, and some might actually endanger themselves. Those predisposed to psychotic conditions are especially at risk for having a traumatic experience while on the drug. It's difficult to draw solid conclusions from the existing studies, but there's more than enough promise here to merit further research and further funding for that research. As Matthew Johnson of Johns Hopkins said, these are among the most debilitating and costly disorders known to humankind. For some people, no existing treatments help, but psychedelics might.
And so what's changed now is the public attitudes have changed. The regulatory agencies are open to research. We just completed a $30 million capstone campaign for our MDMA PTSD phase 3 studies and for commercialization. We're in a major psychedelic renaissance right now. And now we have these new tools for neuroscience to really understand what these drugs do in the brain.
But that is not an easy question to answer.
What the psychedelics do is they target a selective subset of serotonin receptors. The one that produces the psychedelic effects is called the serotonin 2A receptor. A lot of positive effects are associated with activation of that receptor. Unscientifically, what psychedelics do in the brain, you're having several brain areas that are talking to one another that don't normally talk to one another, and you've established new connections, new pathways.
Does it feel when you treat me like you do? And you've laid your hands upon me and tell me who you are.
Is as if a wormhole appears and you're just transported into hyperspace. And it's just a completely different dimension.
And how am I to understand my own life? It must be that the unaided human mind is more capable of correctly modeling nature than the human mind that works through the methodological inductive approach called science. We deny the complexity, the interrelatedness, the soulness, the spiritness, the mindfulness. All of these things are, for science, what are called secondary properties. They are only an aspect of your point of view.
Tell me now, how do I feel?